Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And in today's episode, we will be reviewing the first two seasons of Showtime's Yellowjackets. That'll be coming later. But first, we're going to be doing a review of the French drama thriller. I'm not quite sure what genre it fits into, but it's very good. Full Time. After finally getting an interview for a job that will help her provide for her family, a woman must contend with a national transit strike. That's the official synopsis, and I find that doesn't really encapsulate what is so great about this movie. Ariana, what did you think of Full Time?
Full disclosure, I had taken an edible before this film, but I was so tense that I felt like stone cold sober the entire time while watching this.
Yeah.
And I had no initial understanding what was going on. You had told me it was a descriptive of like a thriller.
Yeah, I just saw thriller. It's rated really high on Metacritic for the year. So I think it's labeled as one of their must-sees. So I was like, I try to watch every movie they label as a must-see. So, and it's only an hour and 30 minutes.
Yes.
Perfect amount of time.
So we were like checking the time, not because like we were just like, oh, we're so done with this film. It was because it's like, is it a thriller that she's going to get like kidnapped or like?
Yes. I kept thinking, when do the stakes ratchet up? And they never do, and I love that.
And then my favorite was you muttering, going, "Oh my God, this is a thriller about her just trying to get home and then trying to get to work, but the strikes are horrible and she's just running all the time. I'm going to love this." And that was the whole thing.
And I loved it. There was a moment near the end where I rewound the movie and I turned on a track from the Mission Impossible soundtrack, like a suspense track.
Yeah, it was like Run for Your Life kind of.
And the music and the images matched up so well. That kind of gives you a sense of what we're dealing with here. The look of the movie looks like the Bourne Identity or a Mission Impossible movie, while the stakes are not that. I felt the tension. I kept trying to feel like, what does this remind me of? Because that wasn't 100% what it was. Then I realized it. It's Safdie brothers movies, like Good Time and Uncut Gems.
But except there is no criminal aspect, unless you talk of as a capitalism is the crime going on here.
Well, I mean, it's
surviving is the crime.
It's a movie that the tone of the movie is so palpable to me. It felt like end of the world, late stage capitalism apocalypse.
Yes.
It just felt like this woman is trying to survive in a world that is increasingly becoming deadlier and more hopeless. And I don't know what she's going to do.
It's also like the risks that she's taking. So it's a film about a woman who works at a like a 5-star hotel,
and she's the head of the maids.
She's head of the maids, and it turns out like this is a 5-star hotel, and one of the comments that she makes to one of the new maids is, "We are supposed to be invisible,"
because it's the maids wearing a deodorant with a very distinctive scent.
But it was like she smelled more of sweat, so she's telling her like it's supposed to, like, your scent is not supposed to be there, but it's basically like the and like the people who like basically stay at the hotel are not supposed to notice that you came in cleaned,
and we never see a single guest.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it is a reflection upon what labor is to the higher classes, how you are not supposed to be expected. And it didn't matter that the strikes were going on, because she comes in late at some point and her manager's like, yeah, everyone else is late because
she's chastised.
Of the strikes, but she's still chastised that she's late and how she's supposed to make it through. It's also
but they don't give her, and like one of the things I really loved was the doorman who will hail taxis for guests, and she has to bribe him with cash to get him to bring a taxi around for her because he's not allowed to do that. Yeah. When it's sort of, Who cares? It's a taxi. There's plenty more
But it's
taxis,
supposed to
right?
be, she's not supposed to be using the same
Yeah,
service as
because
the higher class
she's the
people.
employee.
And then it's also the fact that the taxi themselves have gone into strikes because like the trains aren't running, and then the connecting buses aren't running, and then she is hitchhiking,
Yeah.
which is like that is nerve-wracking already. And like
Well,
there's
and also there's a lot of things in the movie that aren't spoken out loud.
yes.
And one of the things that I want to note is she can't afford to live in Paris, but Paris is the place where most of the jobs are.
Yes.
She lives out in kind of a suburban rural area.
She lives between her job and her ex's place of current living.
And so there's nothing she can do about that commute. That commute is a non-starter, right? Like she just has to endure it.
And there's a moment where she goes to take gonna take the trains. The trains are out. She's gonna ask if there's a connecting bus, at the least if there's minimal service. The buses are out. She goes to check her car. Her car's not starting. She peeks out, and like one of her neighbors sees her trying to start her car and is like, "Hey, I can drive you midway." And they have a conversation briefly.
And that conversation, I want to point that out.
Yes.
He asks if she's headed into Paris to participate in the strikes. And I read a little, and there was like a hotel maids union that was taking part in these labor strikes that are just kind of they just kind of flow one into the next in France right now. And he asks her if that's what she's doing, and she says no. And he just goes, "Oh, that's a shame." And then the conversation continues. But I think he is someone that clearly, I mean, he may have been born in France, but he is a black man. So living in France, that implies that there was an immigration at some point in his past, and probably maybe not too long ago, like could be a few generations ago.
Yeah.
And so he's also a laborer because he's one of those white van mans, like the delivery guys, I think.
The conversation that they end up having is that he's a young retiree. So it meant that he was ex-army, ex-military.
But very like working class kind of a guy. And that comment from him, he's not casting judgment on her. He's just making this statement of, "Oh, it's a shame because that would be really good if there was more solidarity happening."
And I think it's sort of like, it's a shame, but he probably understands.
Yeah, she got 2 kids.
Like he asked her like about her life. She's like, "I have 2 kids. It's cheaper to live where I'm living right now."
She's divorced.
She's divorced.
The husband is horrible at alimony.
The husband is like not currently like within France.
And won't return her phone calls.
But it's also this horrendous thing, like, oh, he doesn't have like connection to call her, but he also did this horrible thing where he did not tell her that he was going to be unavailable during that time while she needs to talk to him. And
there's this constant, it's a thriller in that there's these ticking clocks in the background at all times. One of those ticking clocks is her bank account. It keeps getting lower and lower, and she keeps scrounging for cash the deeper you get into the movie. To the
point that she's like pulling out money from her child's like little bank.
Yeah.
And it's like this also remarking back on when she gets a ride from her friend. I mean, like that person who like lives in the same village. Yeah. Vincent, at some point, she's like, "Oh, it's a good place to raise kids," and he's like, "Yeah, when they're little." Like he has an understanding that over time the kids will be unsatisfied with their lives, or it's just also going to be like they're going to get bored
because they're so far from like the things that are happening in the society.
Yeah, so they get kind of like they miss out, or also don't have a diverse place of living. There is a huge lack of community that she's only feeling a little bit when Vincent is around.
Well, there's Madame Delacroix, I think was her name, the old woman that she asks to watch her kids for her.
Yeah.
And I get the implication, I guess, that she is paying her to do that. But the woman is getting older. She's not quite able to stay up with the kids or keep after them.
Well, it's also she has a hyperactive young little boy
who clearly has like ADHD or something.
But like that the mom doesn't really, unfortunately, have time to get him medicated and isn't really sure if he should be medicated. She's just like, oh, in the evenings he just gets really riled up. But this poor old woman can't manage him.
And she has an adult daughter who off screen is telling her, just drop this woman and her kids. This is not good for you. You're going to end up getting injured. And you're like, there's no one in the movie other than maybe like the management of the hotel and the sort of unseen forces of capitalism that are portrayed as villains. Like this babysitter is completely reasonable and why she can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
And like Julie can't really argue. She was lucky to get this woman for as long as she did. But at one point, Julie calls her own mother. Is that right?
I think it
Because
was like,
I wonder if she was calling her own parent to
no,
help.
it was one of her friends. So the friends that she ends up having a dinner party with,
Oh,
friends
yeah.
with her husband, is like apparently like in London, and she's like, well, how are you getting back? And she's like, well, I'm just gonna fly. And it's just sort of like, it doesn't occur to her because her friend is obviously like of a higher class than her.
But well, I think Julie might have been part of that class at a certain point
because she had dual, like,
later, this side job that she's desperately trying to get, there's some really illuminating dialogue when she sits down for that first face-to-face interview.
Yeah.
And the woman talks about, you have a 4-year absence in the field. How do you feel about coming back after that? And so we learn that Julie has lied on her resume. She hasn't put down that she is like the manager of the maids at this hotel. She's pretending that she took 4 years off from her previous career to take care of her kids. And there is this implication that, oh, you've been out of the workforce, at least of this industry, for long enough that putting you back in, it's very questionable.
That part like gave me stress, considering the fact that like I have been through job interviews where it is kind of like that, even though I have a freelance status at the moment. But I can't be like, yeah, I've just been walking dogs, because they'll be like, oh, so you've been dumbing yourself down. So you've been not like hustling like the rest of us.
Well, it's part of the like great brokenness of capitalism, where it's a system that's designed to never allow you to step away to focus on yourself unless you are obscenely wealthy.
Yeah,
and then
you went to go get a master's degree.
Yeah, it's a system in which you or I, just the working class, which is everyone that's listening to this podcast, you're never allowed to step off the treadmill and take care of you, and whatever that may be, right? And if you do that, you've now immediately put yourself into economic turmoil, because anyone that sees your resume and you're, an adult of age who has these gaps in it, it automatically becomes something of suspicion. And I don't know, like, why is it suspicious? I don't have a criminal record, so I wasn't in prison during that time.
It's this weird thing that you feel like if you admit that you've been doing something else in order to pay for the food on your table, to pay for the roof over your head, but it managed to be a downward thing, meaning like it was a step back, that you yourself don't take your career seriously, when it's just sort of like, I'm sorry, it's just a fucking paycheck at the end of the day.
Well, and that's, I hate the like capitalist interview process. I've never had a job in a communist country, so I can't say what that's like, but I certainly have had many jobs under capitalism. And I despise these questions that are intended to get to the root of like your character or your work ethic, when at the end of the day, I am contracting my labor to you. That's what's going on. I am taking a currency that I have called time, and I am willing to sell you some of that currency in exchange for this abstraction of wealth that society has created that allows me then to pay my bills, buy food, maintain myself. Yeah. That's all that's going on. But it's almost become like quasi-religious with capitalism. So it's, when you are trying to get a job at a company, it's not just that you want a job so you can pay your bills. It's, oh, you have to somehow devote your heart and soul and life to this pursuit. And the pursuit ultimately is to make the person who owns the company richer, because you're certainly not going to get richer even if you work harder. That's not going to happen. The amount of increase you're going to see in your wealth is going to be incredibly small compared to the person who is scraping the most off at the top.
Yeah. And it's not like, the interesting thing is that Julie does take a lot of fucking risks in order to like go to this next job. She doesn't tell her manager that she's applying for other jobs because she knows that she will get reprimanded, and that it's also or
have her hours cut back, or all kinds of things.
They're understaffed. Like, and a lot of it just seems like some of the maids cannot function without her like diligence there, like being on top of them.
Well, if you look at those maids, there's a very clear thing that's the problem here: a lack of solidarity. And think about the class she came from. She came from a class that, while there's economic solidarity in that, hey, we're all rich and we all like being rich, or at least upper middle class. Now that she's downgraded, she has been disassociated from them for the most part. And she doesn't understand what actual worker solidarity looks like. And she's in an environment of obscene wealth where that's discouraged.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing this is what a workplace looks like, where the workers don't have each other's backs.
And the thing is, like, the only time that they have in order to be together is during their lunches or dinners, where they're able to discuss certain things.
And there's camaraderie there.
But it is also how, because there's lack of solidarity, there's a lack of the ability of wanting to take over work for someone else for their own favor. They are like relishing on their own time off as quickly as possible and not willing to give it up, because they know very well that if they give that up, someone else is going to ask for more from them. Which, like, I've been in those situations where, like, you'll be called in and be like, well, so and so wants to take time off, and you're just kind of like, but I know if I take these hours, someone else is going to ask me to take over for them,
and you just quicksand,
like, not respected for wanting my time off, or the fact that they don't have an extra worker to participate.
When these are instances that are the problems of the management, not the workers.
Yes.
It's if somebody wants to take a time off. No. And I was in a situation at my previous job where, because of COVID, I dug my heels in and I wasn't making compromises. And there was an attempt to try to guilt me because another person folded and made compromises. And I didn't react. I just went, oh, well. And that's what you have to do at a certain point. It's, no, you are the supervisors, the managers, the bosses. That's your problem, not mine. I don't have an equal stake in this business. So if someone takes time off, it's not my responsibility, and there's no pressure on me to cover. That's you cover then. You're the one who took the position as the leader in this business, right?
Yeah. And it is like this thing where you can feel like the way that, like, Julie is stretching herself thin by her children, although very young, and understandable that she has not told them. They're trying to go about, like, normalcy in life. Like, they don't know that she's having conflict with the babysitter. They don't know that, for example, she doesn't have enough money to buy, like, the additional snacks that they're used to having.
Well, there's that whole ongoing thing of her son's birthday and how she has to keep downgrading her plans for, like, what she's going to get him.
Yes.
And then that horrible scene where she goes to buy, like, it's just little shitty dollar store type stuff.
Yeah.
And she can't even afford that with the cash that she has.
And it's sort of like, it's this thing that, like, he gets a trampoline for his birthday, and the other parents help set up the net, which is, hey, it's a moment of solidarity between the other parents. Vincent, who happens to be the father of one of the kids that, like, her son plays with, is there, and he fixes her heater, even though she kind of, like, tries to, like, have him not do it because she's embarrassed by it.
Yeah, that's in her personal life. There's just this constant presence of embarrassment about her economic conditions.
Yeah.
And that keeps her from embracing her role as a worker, because she doesn't want to see herself like the workers that are striking. She's not one of them, quote unquote. She's different. We can see that she is not different. She is going through the same struggles that drove those people to strike in the first place.
Yeah, because
of not being able to pay for survival.
Yeah, because one of her new maids gets fired for, like, passing Julie's ID while being clocked out. She is released from the position, and her manager tells her, do you know that she's raising 2 kids by herself? And Julie has shock because she's like, she's just a child. Like,
but she never went to any effort to learn anything about this other woman,
because she's resentful at the fact that she's been told to train her when she doesn't have time.
And once again, no solidarity.
There's, like, no, like, the management doesn't have solidarity with her.
So management never has solidarity with the workers.
Like, so, but it's also like this thing of, like, like, the management on top, there's, like, the manager of the hotel, and then there's upper management, and the management of the hotel is kind of like, I can't, like, it's this insane thing where it's sort of like, well, if I cover your ass, who covers me?
And once again, everybody is against everybody, and we somehow expect this system to be successful. It's no, when you throw people in a gladiatorial arena and hand them weapons, a bunch of people die. A bunch of people don't make it.
And like then she ends up, because like that person slipped her, her ID to lock out. It's because she's going for her second interview. And in the second interview, she is like, it is a tough interview.
She's desperate.
Like, she's desperate, but she's also like going through something that she is being interviewed by another woman. And the other woman is
younger woman too.
A younger woman who is like, does not remark on the age, but straight up is like, you said you have 2 kids. Do you understand that you will be losing time being around your kids because we work long hours? And she's like, no, it's fine. She's like, I see that you work far away. How are we supposed to get you with the strikes going on? And like, Julie doesn't know.
She's not honest about what's
she's like trying up until the point that like the woman stops her and says, I need you to be honest with me. I need you to be completely honest with me during this interview.
But Julie also understands honesty could mean she doesn't get the job.
And like, you could see like the crumbling on her face when this woman just tells her like, stop bullshitting me right now. And we don't know if she ends up telling her the truth, but you could just feel the pressure that's going on. And then watching Julie call to be like, did I get that? She said she was going to call me today. She hasn't called me. And the other person is like on the phone, like, well, I don't know what's going on. And so she calls again and they're like, well, I guess the position was filled. And she's so desperate. And then it turns out that she's been fired from her job during a strike, which apparently is illegal to fire
and they
people.
Didn't let her know.
No.
She finds out by making this insane odyssey from where she lives back into Paris, goes to scan her ID and finds it's no longer registered in the system.
Yes.
It's like they couldn't even do the courtesy of letting her know so she could stay at home. They made it so they didn't want to go through the messiness of telling her, which it's sort of, if you're the boss, you accept that. Then that's a duty of the boss. Is you're going to fire people under this system and you're going to have to do it to their fucking face.
And that also means that head management approved it.
Yeah. It's a film that I feel like is so efficient with the time that it has. There is not a wasted second in this movie. The way her commute is framed on film is always gripping. You don't know if she's going to make it. You're not sure what's going to happen to this character. And I thought that's such a brilliant thing to do, because while the film is political, it's not attempting to be pedantic and be preachy in any way.
Yeah.
It's simply unfolding the story of this individual who is trying to survive in the current conditions. Mm-hmm. And it uses things like the background sound, so television and radio broadcasts, to give us that world building aspect. So we know about the strike. We know who's striking. We know the severity of it, not because our main character talks about it with anyone, but because newspapers, media, all of these things in passing are filling in those gaps. So I never felt disoriented, which could be very easy to do with a movie like this.
Yeah.
I would say within the first 15 minutes of full time, you understand the character, you understand what's happening with the narrative, and you understand the stakes.
Yeah. And she is like completely like imperfect, because during work she's telling the other maids, don't have the TV on, but she has the TV on, like going with the like
the transit strike.
She's like, don't have your phone on. She has her phone on because like,
every rule she's breaking.
Like, she's breaking. And it's also like this thing of like, it's this sad thing that you almost want to be like, you should not be the exception. You should not be the exception, even though she.
But remember, what is that? It's a lack of solidarity. I should be able to do it, but you shouldn't, because the rules say that you shouldn't.
But it's also like this thing where it's heartbreaking, because it's sort of like she's trying to do better for herself, and she only has like one other coworker that kind of gets it. And even the other coworker, what I love is like the other coworker asks her like, oh, how did the interview go? She's like, I don't think it did well. She's like, I probably think you're gonna get it. And then she's like, well, I have a second interview at so and so day. She's like, I'm not filling out that time for you. I'm sorry, don't ask me again. Because like, she already did it for her in the past, so she's just like, I already did you a favor, I'm not doubling down for you because of this. And it just like, it's heartbreaking, because at the end is she does get the job, but like, once you're like there feeling that relief for her, all I could think was, how's she gonna get there?
Yeah, I had the same thought. Is she has these tears of joy, but the film isn't that explicit, and I thought they could be tears of joy, or they could be tears of the realization of So how am I going to report for work? Because the strike's not over.
Yeah.
I also think it does a good job of showing why it is important to compensate these types of labor well, because we get to see what society looks like when there aren't transit, like available transit to keep things moving.
Yeah.
And society comes to a stop. And so often the media, because it's owned by very wealthy corporations and individuals, tries to frame labor strikes as the worker being selfish and the worker hurting you. It's the worker's fault you can't get to your job. But it's not. The worker does not have access to what have been labeled the profits, right?
Yeah.
That the management of the company does. So the worker is just simply saying, we cannot sustain ourselves on what you're giving us, so we're not going to continue with this labor until you give us compensation that helps us stay alive. It's the fault of the company. It's the fault of the management. They are the ones to blame for this shit. And because that solidarity idea is not communicated clearly, and it's intentionally obfuscated by the institutions of mass media, they make it so someone like a Julie constantly fails to make that connection herself. She's so caught up in the quicksand of survival that she's not able to take a moment and look and go, oh, I am the same as these transit workers. We're all on the same boat, and we're all going to sink together if we don't do something collectively. And so it's a movie that completely stunned me with how good it was. Like, I knew it would probably be good just based on the reviews that I saw, but sometimes you get, European movies, they're good, but they can be a little slow paced. They can kind of drag a little bit just because of the styles of filmmaking that are popular in one region versus another. But this, like I said, it did such an excellent job of taking a tone you don't associate with a slice of life movie.
Yeah.
And nailed it.
It's also one of those films that I think, depending on what you believe in, is what you're going to be your takeaway. If you are a person that doesn't believe that unions benefit us, at the end of the day, you're going to think that the transit union was being selfish and look how horrible, like, they fucked over this woman. Or if you're thinking,
but I mean, that's not the intent of the director, though.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the intent of the director. And it's also like this thing of like, you could also take it that you understand why it is that Julie takes these positions, like, to begin with, because she has to do something. She has to feed her family somehow. Like, the selfishness, even though you want her to take a pause, but the thing is, like, since she doesn't have a moment to reflect, she doesn't have that capability to do it.
But we think about Vincent and his offer to repair her heat.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment of solidarity because he doesn't ask to be paid.
No.
He does it because that's what you do. You help other people and they help you when you need it. And it's something that in Western society has been almost nearly lost.
Yeah, and I think it's also, it makes you feel selfish, or it makes you feel needy. And it's like, there's nothing worse within a Western culture in having to need other people.
Well, it's
like
hyper individualization is what they want.
How dare you need people and then expect, like, oh, you don't have, like, you're gonna have to need to have the money to pay them. Like, it has to be through a service and not through, like, oh, we have different skills, let me offer you that skill in order to help you.
But yeah, I give, like, full-time strongest possible recommendations.
Yes.
It is a movie that if you're someone who maybe doesn't like European cinema, you've watched them before, you're like, oh, it's kind of boring this movie is the total opposite of that. Especially if you like action movies, like we said, The Bourne Identity, Mission Impossible, if you love the just unbearable at points tension of a Safdie brothers movie, then I think Full Time is going to be a film you're going to love too. We are back, and now we're going to be talking about the TV series Yellowjackets. We just finished the second season. If you're not familiar, Yellowjackets tells the narrative of a team of wildly talented high school girl soccer players who survive a plane crash deep in the Ontario wilderness. The series chronicles their descent from a complicated but thriving team to warring cannibalistic clans while also tracking the lives they have attempted to piece back together. Some characters are played by younger actors in flashbacks as teenagers, while older actors play them in the present day, those who survived and made it back, as they reveal the truth about their survival 25 years later. So before we get into our thoughts on the show, one thing I want to do, which I think is funny, is talk about what your preconceptions were about what this show was before you started watching it. So did you have a thought, like you'd probably seen the title, maybe some images, brief little snippets about what was happening on it, maybe. What did you think this was the show was about?
Probably like moms and their teens surviving in the wilderness kind of thing. I had no idea what it really was.
That's what I, for some reason, thought, oh, this is a show about like a bunch of moms and their teenage daughters who got trapped out in the woods.
Yeah.
But I didn't even think in the woods. For some reason, I thought they were on an island.
I think you were also confusing it with another.
There was like an Amazon
Prime
original,
Amazon
yeah,
show where, like,
about a bunch of teenage girls that get stuck on an island
Yeah.
that I heard wasn't very good. And so I think that's why I steered away from this at the beginning, because I was like, oh, is it like that show? And nah, I'm not interested. But I was intrigued because I would hear more about it. And a lot of the older actresses are actresses I like, especially like Melanie Linsky, I think is really good. And so it was seeing an article that was trying to explain the no-eyed man that had me go, what is this show again? Yeah, I was not expecting that. I was like, that's really interesting. So now that we have watched the 2 seasons that exist, I believe the creators said they have a 5-season plan. So next season will be the midway mark. What do you think about the show so far in general?
I really enjoy the show. I feel like season 2 is way stronger than the first season, especially the acting with the younger actors playing the younger versions of everyone there. It seems as if like the younger actors started studying like their older actors to really try to like mimic them or be closer to what.
Not do an impression, but
no, but like
the cadence of their voice and things like that.
Yes.
Well, I think Sophie Thatcher, who plays teen Natalie, was kind of doing that in season 1, but I think you are right. The other actors are doing that more now.
Yeah, because Jasmine Savoy Brown, who was very good in the first season, it felt like there were certain things that she picked.
Who plays Thaisa?
That picked up that Tawny Cypress was doing, like at the least with her mouth and the pauses. She was really like going through that and just like mimicking or not like doing a better acting method so you could really see that connection.
It was like she's trying to go, what would this woman have been like as a teenager? So what aspects of her now would have been visible then?
Yes. Melanie Linsky is just, she's perfect in this role.
Yeah,
she is such an asshole, and it's like
she is like such an unlikable character, which is not what I was expecting.
Yeah, and it's like it's hard to like not like to look away from her on screen because I'm just fascinated as to what her character will do next.
Well, because there's a look to her where she just looks kind of like she's a very beautiful woman, but her body type, which is something she's talked about a lot, is very kind of average. She isn't super thin. She's not in shape. She just looks like a regular suburban mom type of person.
Yeah.
But that character of Shauna is so vile and so willing to do just the most horrible things and feels no guilt about it. The worst she'll feel as a result is worry that she's going to get caught, or kind of knowing I shouldn't take pleasure from this, but I do, so I don't really know what to do about it.
All right, what would a normal person do? And it's like mimicking them, which is great. I think like Christina Ricci is like playing against the type that she's been playing for a long time. I
think she's the most psychopathic of them all.
Yes, and like it's interesting because I feel like a lot of times they would have made her play Natalie kind of character,
girl hero kind of thing, yeah,
kind of like the teen version of Van. Like they would have her play like that, tomboy, whatever kind of personality. But I do like this interpretation of Misty just being like
she's type A, micromanager, but like a homicidal micromanager.
Like there's a certain sadness about her that it's really sometimes you
Well,
believe
you could
for
read her as like
me-
neurodivergent because
Yeah.
she clearly doesn't understand social cues. But then as she understands them more, it's not as though they become embedded in part of her behavior. It becomes part of a toolbox she uses to manipulate and control
And
situations.
it's hard. I think it's like, especially, I feel a certain tenderness towards Misty that at times it's hard to deal with because it's like she
Now, is it adult Misty or teenage Misty?
both.
Okay.
I think the teenage version won me over a little bit more on season 2.
Well, see, I feel like in season 2, for me, Misty became very, there's like a giant red flag on her where I'm like, oh, I think Misty is going to end up being one of the chief antagonists of this entire story because she is so manipulative.
I think she's like more clear-eyed as to what occurred versus everyone else.
She has like accepted that it happened and I'm moving on.
Yeah, it's accepted that like it happened, but it was also sort of like it was like basically her going like, this gave me a ton of tools in my little box to deal with.
But the thing is, they don't know it, but she's one of the chief reasons why they're stuck there.
Yes.
So she manipulated the situation to her benefit because there's a part of her that saw, I don't thrive well in that outside world, but I think here
I could be somebody.
or like, the playing field is level enough that I can leverage the skills that I already have and have a position of power inside this social group.
Yeah, it's also just sort of like she is sadly enough a person, like a character who deeply wants to be loved, but doesn't understand how you get that.
Well, she associates love with manipulation because the only adult that survives is Ben, the assistant coach, who ends up having to have a leg cut off. That's a spoiler we'll give you because I don't think it's not too big of a spoiler. It happens very early on. And she falls desperately in love with him, but thinks
English patient kind of thing.
Yeah, but it's that very Munchausen by proxy kind of thing, where you hear about the mothers that poison their kids because they love caring for them. It makes them feel like they're a really good person.
Yeah.
And so it's the most toxic way of, because first of all, like, he's older than her and he clearly is not interested in her. And we find out, that he's gay, so that's his main reason. And also she's a child, but you can tell that, like, oh, even in her relationships as an adult, she's doing the shit. Because the first time we see her, she's on a blind date with a guy I think she met online through like an app, and she has disabled her car, so he has to give her a ride home in order to get him to come inside so they can hook up. But like,
he's trying not to do
it. Like, that's how we're introduced to her. So it's very clear to me the showrunners want us to understand Misty is a sociopathic manipulator.
Yes.
She is never going to be honest if lying would get her what she wants quicker.
Well, it's also, she is going to basically, she's gonna lie because she knows that it's almost like she can tell that people don't like her unless she's playing a certain role. And she's like, well, I have to play the role of the victim, or I have to play the role of the savior, or I have to play the role of the helper.
Well, the fact that she is a nurse by profession is so funny to me.
And it's just like, you see within the show, because she's the one that was like noting all the herbs and like picking out like what can be eaten, what can't be eaten. Like,
she's like the herbalist in the coven.
Yes. And so it influences her character, and everyone has like these little specific roles, but like Shauna is the butcher.
She's the one, who'll get her hands dirty.
And like Misty is the herbalist.
The Machiavellian one who's kind of
Natalie is the hunter. Lottie is the priestess. And then
what about Ty? Where do you think Ty? But she's supposed to be the voice of reason, but then we also have sort of a multiple personality thing with her.
Like Ty and Van are almost on the same tier where they're like both like soldiers.
You'd said like Ty was kind of a knight, the noble knight.
Yeah.
But then we'll talk about her in a little bit. So we kind of talk about Shauna, we talk about Misty, Natalie, and I've never been a big fan of Juliette Lewis. I'm gonna be honest. I don't think she's a bad actress. There's just something about her acting style. And I think she also exudes, and this is no judgment on Juliette Lewis, because this is all based on cultural perception, and I know this isn't reality. trashiness. I feel like Juliette Lewis, and I don't know if that's because like Natural Born Killers kind of framed her in that way, in like a very intense way in the culture. But every time I see Juliette Lewis, she just feels very trashy to me, but not in a way that makes me go, ooh, I don't like her. It's just sort of, that's the kind of character I expect her to play. And Natalie is she literally a trailer trash kid.
Yeah.
And so they did good casting in that regard.
Yeah, and I think it's this I think also with Juliette Lewis is, despite the trashiness that you may feel towards her, there is this weird charm and allure about her that she feels.
There's an intensity.
It's an intensity that feels very like grounded to me, because it feels like an intensity that you've met already.
Well, and she felt like Natalie feels like the most earnest of all the girls.
Yes.
Like Natalie tries not to lie if she doesn't have to. She tries to do the right thing. And that's why she struggles and suffers so much over the 2 seasons, is because she's the only one that really is trying to do good.
Well, she's the one that is like kind of like accepting the circumstances of what is happening while not slipping as badly as everyone else is.
She's the only one that really feels guilt.
Because I think the thing is, at first we think that maybe it's Shauna that is like the most realistic out of all of them, but we see her slipping.
Especially in season 2.
Yeah.
Like with the carjacking little subplot and things like that.
But Shauna is just she's mimicking normalcy as much as she can.
She's masked.
Yes. Versus like Natalie has already gone through hell in her regular life.
Well, because when we meet her, she's just finishing up like her 4th or 5th stint in a drug rehab.
Yes. And then her past self, she had like endured like, domestic abuse at home.
When there was a parent that was accidentally killed.
She's the one that has experimented with the most drugs. So between her teammates, everybody views her as a druggie. So she's already kind of an outcast between them.
But I think the drugs we can see didn't really happen as a teenager. They came as a reaction when they came back to the civilized world, quote unquote.
She was
Was she already doing drugs?
Yeah, she was like the one that had alcohol in her bag.
But I feel like it wasn't to the point of abuse, the way it kind of is framed as an adult. So what I think is there was already a predilection to addiction.
Yeah.
They came back, and because she's the one that's processing it the most raw, she fell into those drugs as a crutch to deal with the nightmares and the guilt, while the other ones did other things. Like Shauna marries Jeff, has a kid, and is like, I'm gonna be a suburban mom, and she's clearly a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah,
right?
She's everything she didn't want to be.
Yeah, and I feel like that Shauna's arc in season 1 is the most interesting arc in that first season. Some of the other characters don't feel as rich as her character in that season. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about kind of the parts of the show I think are weak.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of Taissa? I feel, in my opinion, teenage Taissa, Jasmine Savoy Brown, is a bit more interesting to me than Tawny Cypress as adult Taissa. And I don't know, I think that may just be Taissa's plot in present day. Feels like it's spinning wheels right now. They're just delaying the inevitable info dump of what's going on.
Yeah, I think with Taissa, it's sort of like the teenage version is interesting because she already has her life like pre-planned. But it's also like this thing is like she's the opposite of Shauna. Shauna had a plan where she was gonna go to Brown, she was gonna like become this writer, but she like just like made a U-turn when she came back.
She took Jackie's life.
She took Jackie's life, but she also took what was safe.
Yeah.
And Taissa, like, apparently comes home and does exactly what she plans to do.
She comes out as a lesbian.
Yeah, she comes out as a lesbian because, like, there is a conversation that, like, Shauna and Taissa have when they see each other as adults, where she's telling her, like, I would have gone to Brown. I would have, like, dated all these artsy boys and, like, da-da-da-da. Like, I would have lived in, like, France for a year. And Taissa's like, yeah, I would have gone to school, had, like, amazing relationships with all these women. And, like, Shauna's like, you did all that because she's running for election. It's sort of like
she's running to be senator of New Jersey.
Yes. And then there's like, there's the rumors of her cannibalism, like because of the person running against her. And it's like, it feels too perfect. It feels as if like she's never had problems to begin with versus teenage like Thaisa is stuck in this place.
Well, I feel like the mystery around teenage Thaisa is more interesting to me
Yeah.
than the mystery that's happening to adult Thaisa, and they are interlinked, but so much of it, that's one of the plots that feels kind of by the numbers. There were certain things about the development of her run for Senate and the stuff going on with her wife and her son that I kind of could foresee after the first couple episodes of, oh, it's going to go to this place.
Yeah, I think it's also because Thaisa, the young version of Thaisa, like everybody is affected by her actions. And then the older version of Thaisa,
she feels like she's a distant thing.
She's a distant thing that it wasn't until the second season that we see the rippling effects into her family that you're kind of like, okay, now she really needs to be serious about this. And I think it's just like that teaser thing. Like now, this with the second season, adult Thaisa is a little bit more interesting versus the first season. You're kind of like, she is
running for Senate. That's
feels like she's had the perfect life, and that she's just been basically trying to cover the tracks of her past and continue on with this picture perfect life, and always and giving us what we always see when it comes to these type of personalities. Like, ooh, they're struggling to get their numbers up. Oh, well, their partner is not really sure they should be running because they should be focusing on their family. And it's hard enough to be gay and black in America. You're gonna do this to your family.
But then she also was part of a group of girls that ate each other to survive. And it's clear that sort of society in general has forgiven them for that, because it's almost like it's like that movie Alive, where it's like, oh, the soccer team got stuck in the Andes. They had to do what they had to do.
But the thing is, like, it's supposed to be like they never admitted to anything.
And I think the public believes they ate their dead friends.
Yeah.
And the opening of the first episode makes it clear that they were not eating dead friends. They were hunting their friends.
Yeah.
And then eating them. And
then we go back to see like how it is that they got to there.
And so I do think that it has a really great pilot.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the better first episodes of a show I've ever seen, in that the first scene immediately hooks you in, because you see a teenage girl running through snowy woods who is then caught, skinned, and butchered.
Yeah.
And by these people in like furs, and they have animal bones with like deer head skulls and antlers and all. And you're like, what is going on? And so it immediately presents you with a situation that causes you to ask lots of questions and pulls you in and makes you want to know, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Then the show itself, the structure, I would describe it as Desperate Housewives meets Lost.
Mm-hmm.
Where present day is it's basically a bunch of middle-aged women. So they're all in like their 40s.
Yeah.
Running around dealing with problems they've created.
Yeah.
And just kind of snowball and make worse and worse as they go.
Yeah.
And then the past is clear that there is some sort of evil presence in this wilderness that's pushing the girls in a certain direction. Lottie, who we discover early on in the show, has some sort of mental health issues, possibly schizophrenia, and is on medication, runs out of her medication while they're out there. She's the one who discovers the mysterious cabin in the woods. And it feels like, oh, she's being guided in a way. What do you find to be the stronger element of the show, the flashback portions or the present day portions?
That is hard, because it's just sort of like okay. So for me in the first season, like I'm more attracted to watching like what's the present stuff, but only because the acting is so strong. And sometimes the past felt like, oh, okay, they're really dragging this out. And then towards the second season, there's a good balance.
The back half of the second season, the flashbacks became much better, in my opinion.
Yes. And it's sort of like we get a better development of how far they're all willing to go, or like
we understand why they go that far.
Yeah. And it's just it's also just, it's kind of like the second season for me was like really good, because it felt as if everybody found their footing. like the introductory of like Lottie in the present as to what she's doing with her life and how this has affected her. And then we get to see Van, and that we like, it's not that I could have predicted the way that Van would have been, but this interesting thing where she has a VHS like store, and
So
like
she's still living in the past.
yeah, and it's like her remark being like when somebody's like, "Oh yeah, you are always living in the past," and she's like, "Yes, because there was a possibility that we could be happy." Like,
And so yeah, she's refusing to move on because if she moves on, she gives up on that dream.
yes,
Even though it's very clear the circumstances of her life are bad and they're going to get worse.
yes, and it's just they it's not perfect, and because it's like it's so hard to be like a perfect show. Like one to me, like one of the few perfect shows is like Leftovers, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to like that emotional tug.
It's that perfect Leftovers is that perfect mix of tone, character, theme, like everything just kind of fit together.
Yes. And I think with this, it is almost as if like with the first season, they were like testing out like, okay, how much grit can the audience take? And it's as if like they went like, oh, they really like this. So that means we are going to get darker with the second season. We're going to become more intense.
But there's some moments where I'm kind of like, they kind of lose me a little bit tonally. In the second season, we have these moments, particularly because they bring in Elijah Wood as this sort of side character to kind of boost Misty's story.
Yeah.
And there are some things that just come across as ridiculously silly.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we have these flashbacks to the girls and their sort of transformation into this coven of cannibals that is intensely bleak, these two tones, especially near the end, I felt were wrestling with each other, and it kind of was ping-ponging me a little bit, where I thought the present day is playing really like murder and shooting people really light and like trying to be like Desperate Housewives, right? Where, oh, this is just a higher end soap opera. But then you have this just desolate, depressing backstory that's happening. And I just wish there had been something to kind of balance the tone. I know for me personally, I was very happy to see the teenage side of the story become bleaker because that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, I know.
And I wanted it even worse. I mean, but then I also realized, oh, this is trying to appeal to a mainstream audience, and the level of horror that I want out of it, I'm just not going to get that from this show.
Honest. You love bleak and you hate women. That's your problem.
Yes, I am a noted woman hater.
You're like, oh, one of the head writers a woman? Ew.
It was bad enough the cast is made up of a bunch. My favorite character is Jeff.
Oh, Jeff.
Which that actor Warren Cole does a great job as Jeff. He's such a like schlub. He's so good at playing the guy who was hot shit in high school, but now he's just like a furniture salesman in the same town he grew up in, and like he's still an athletic, attractive guy, but the luster is gone.
I mean, it's also like you want to tell, like, you just want to shake him and be like, listen, you married up. She's far more smarter than you are. She's far more willing to go to the extremes compared to you, and you just don't fucking.
I mean, I think I don't know if I'd say married up, because he does get embroiled in having to cover up a murder in this because of Shauna's actions. But I would say in terms of intelligence, he certainly married up. That she settled for him out of guilt about what happened, I think.
I think it's between guilt, but it's also sort of like she just wanted to be normal. It was like this desperate need to be normal from her that like it's almost painful, because I feel like like Misty is like completely aware of who she is. This is what she is, and that's it.
Oh yeah, I'd say of all of them, Misty is the most self-actualized character.
Yeah.
She has no doubts about herself.
And like Natalie is like trying to figure out who she is.
The most doubtful character.
The most doubtful.
And what's interesting is Misty and Natalie get put together. So you have the most confident versus the least confident character.
Yes.
And in season 1, they're together like constantly.
Yeah, and then like Thaisa, who is sort of like, you're deriving me from my path.
Well, I think there's those interesting parallels. Like you were talking, Thaisa is being compared and contrasted with Shauna. Natalie is being compared and contrasted with Misty in season 1. Then in season 2, you're seeing Natalie and Lottie kind of contrasted.
Yeah.
You see a lot of Thaisa and Van contrasted.
Mhm.
So would we say that Natalie and Shauna are being but Misty and Shauna, are they being contrasted?
I don't
really feel like
they
that in
are.
season 2, but I feel like there's a way to do that because they're both digging holes deeper and deeper in the things that they're doing, and they both have very supportive men in their lives in season 2.
There's also like that difference between like this. I mean, with Elijah Wood, mind you, his acting is incredible.
Oh yeah, he's
here.
great.
Like
he's the kind of character I exactly wanted him to be in this show.
Yes, and it's sort of like this interesting thing of Misty finding herself of someone who as like is precise as she is.
He's her soulmate.
And like how
what it is.
Then you find out that like Misty has never been through a breakup, meaning she's never been in a relationship. And like that is heartbreaking because it's like she's like she couldn't even fake being like because she knows who she is so well that she can't fake being someone else in order to entice a relationship out of someone.
Or when she does try to fake, it's so obvious she's faking that it makes the situation so uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's just sort of like when she meets Walter, who is kind of like in that same level as her, she ultimately like tells him to leave.
It overwhelms her.
It overwhelms her because it's sort of like she's like, I can't, this is competing interests, like you will be my downfall kind of thing. And again, it's like this funny thing is just like I love all the characters. I just feel horrible Misty, even though I know she's so conniving.
I can't imagine Misty's gonna survive this show. Like she just feels like a character that is gonna cross a line at some point and is gonna be fucking dead.
Her to survive.
I mean, I could also see her being the only one that survives because it's like, well, she's the only one willing to do what it takes.
And like, I really appreciate it with the second it brought us like adult version of Van, obviously. And how you could tell like
Lauren Ambrose
obviously watched the younger actor Liv
Houston
mimicked them as did similar like actions, but it's what I love is the look on their faces, meaning both actors past and present when they are in it. When they are in it,
it is locked in.
It is locked in. They have made their decision.
There's no going back.
There's no reasoning. It is done. And it is something that is just like so powerful to watch because there are moments like that, like with Van in the past in the first season, but the second season, you just see her like
and it makes,
going in.
It makes sense because she didn't have an adult counterpart in season 1. So because they're featuring her as an adult, the flashbacks highlight her more, and we really get to go deeper with that character. And the same thing with Lottie. I think Courtney Eaton, who plays Teen Lottie, is really good in that role.
Yeah.
Because I feel very conflicted about Lottie. And that season finale for season 2 really suddenly like clarifies everything, kind of snaps into view so you understand what really happens to Lottie out there and that she isn't quite the villain the story was kind of convincing you she was.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. It's a show that I don't think it's perfect, but I definitely enjoy it and I'm going to keep watching it.
Yeah.
My hope is that the deeper we get into the story, maybe that adult part of it loses some of the silliness. Like I don't mind it sometimes. Misty's hallucination in the sensory deprivation tank immediately reminded me of something like from a Twin Peaks episode or something.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's the kind of stuff where like, if you're going to do weird, don't do soap opera silly. And they're two different tones, right? Like weird is I want to turn on an episode of Yellowjackets and have a sense of, okay, I kind of know where the story is going, but I want there to be moments I could never have predicted that happen.
Yeah.
That are a showcase of maybe, because that's definitely a showcase of Christina Ricci. And it's a showcase of a lot of the crew with the cinematography and the editing. And a special guest star who gets a song, an original song. And it's that was such a delightful little moment in season 2 where I just was like, more of this. Like, give me one of these every 6 episodes or something.
Yeah.
Just to kind of liven things up, shake things up a little bit.
I did love, like, when we were watching the second season, that there was new characters introduced, and you immediately were like, not a lost situation, which
Well,
it totally was.
There is a moment in the flashback in episode 1 of season 2 where I guess there were supposed to be a lot of background girls in season 1. They clearly were very background because I wasn't paying attention.
They weren't in the first season.
Yeah, and so it's a lot like Nikki and Paulo in season 3 of Lost, I think is where they got thrown in, maybe 4, where it's just suddenly we're introduced to characters that, oh, they were there the whole time. The camera just didn't focus on them. And I hate shit like that. And I know exactly why they're in the show is because they need people to die, and they've established these characters, the main ones, as coming back. So we can't kill them off.
Yeah.
So we have to then go, oh yeah, you didn't notice those other girls that were there? And that was one thing that I was a little annoyed with. I got past it.
Yeah.
Because I understood why it was there. It does feel at the end of the second season, the horror element of the show has now kicked in.
Mhm.
And I would expect season 3's flashbacks to be even more intense than the previous ones.
Yeah.
And I am interested to see where the story's going, because they have clearly established there is a sort of, I would almost say kind of like a Stephen King entity of some kind that's guiding events both in the past and in the present. And so, yeah, it was a show that I didn't know what to expect when I started watching it, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit. Those adult actors carry the show a lot of the time.
The second half of the second season was finally when you were buying in, because you were going,
because that first,
I don't know, and I was just like, I'm gonna keep watching.
Well, because I liked season 1, and then when season 2 started, I kind of felt like the momentum from season 1 didn't carry over completely, and it almost felt like it was that thing that a show like Lost will do, where they keep tapping the brakes because they don't want to reveal the big thing yet.
Yeah.
But then it starts to have this artificial feel where you're just like, but we all know there's a thing and you're just holding it back. So just tell us the thing and then we can explore that idea. And they do finally get to that in the second half of the second season. And that's what makes me interested to see where season 3 goes. So would you recommend our audience check out Yellowjackets?
Yep.
Yeah, I would say it is a show that it's not too heady, but it doesn't disrespect the audience. And it just you get to see some familiar faces that you may have not seen for a while. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check the show notes for relevant links to things we talked about or things associated with Pop Cult, including our website, popcult.blog. We put up reviews there every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, extra on the weekends. And we cover all sorts of things: movie, television, comic books, even some solo tabletop roleplay games we've been doing this year. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to this podcast so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you do visit popcult.blog, you'll notice we're in the midst of a series here at the end of July that I'm calling Angry Cinema, where we're looking at movies made by filmmakers who were clearly angry about a social issue and made a movie about it. And sometimes those are really good, sometimes they're a little incoherent. We're finishing that up here in the coming week, and we'll be reviewing Alex Cox's Walker, as well as Park Chan-wook's Lady Vengeance, and then finishing off the week with Jody Hill's Observe and Report. And then in August, the film theme for that entire month is going to be flashback to 1983. So we're going to be looking at some films that are turning 40 years old this year, films that have kind of slipped under my radar, some that I'm revisiting, and kind of seeing what that year had to offer. If you do like what we do here and over on popcult.blog, we really encourage you to think about supporting us on Patreon. We have lots of different reward levels there. We also have exclusive podcast episodes that you can only get if you're a patron. Right now, we're doing a series called Double Down that looks at movies that weren't considered audience failures, but that Siskel and Ebert gave 2 thumbs down to. We're watching those movies for the first time and determining if we agree with them or not. We've got a lot more ideas coming up for those patron exclusive podcasts, so join now and you'll be able to have access to all of them. We want to thank our patrons, Morphine, who donates at the sneak preview level, and Becca and Matt, who donate at the writer's room level. If you donate at that $10 a month or higher writer's room level, you're going to get to pick one movie a month that I will watch and write up a review for, and you can even include your own thoughts if you so choose. Well, until next time, keep listening.